Good morning, everybody. Welcome along. Thank you for coming back for the second day. Those of you that are here yesterday, thank you online. All the people that are joining us online. My name is Tony Allen. I'm Chief Executive of the ACE Certification Scheme. I'm here to kick you off this morning. Today's theme is really around the driving improvements and the role of regulators in the kind of age assurance ecosystem, and in particular looking at how regulators are often the catalyst for change with the requirements they put in place, but not necessarily the drivers of how you do it. The more you need to do it rather than how you do it. And this is about that relationship between needing to do it, how you do it, what you do, and the role that regulators play. We're going to kick off, first of all, with a pre-recorded interview that I did with Kelly Tallon the other day. Kelly is the Manager of Regulatory Policy and Strategy for the eSafety Commissioner. She's got a wealth of experience in online safety, opportunities and risks presented by emerging technologies, leading eSafety's policy work for over 5 years. Prior to joining the eSafety Commissioner, she had a variety of NGO and government roles working at the intersection of technology and children's rights. She holds law degrees from Harvard and the University of New South Wales. And this was pre-recorded. It was pre-recorded over Zoom, and I do apologise for the fact there is a slight time delay on the video, which we've done our best to try to fix, but hopefully you can live with it on there. But you want to play that in, guys? Hello, and welcome to this latest session. At the Global Age Assurance Standard. So this is a pre-recorded video. We recorded it as live, and so hopefully you'll experience it as though Kelly was here in lovely UK. Unfortunately, she's in very sunny Sydney instead. So I want to welcome along Kelly Tallon. Kelly works for the eSafety Commissioner's office in Australia. Kelly, just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Thank you so much again for the opportunity to do a pre-record. I'm really sorry I couldn't join everybody there in person, but I hope you have an excellent summit. We'll definitely be watching from Australia, maybe some of the catch-up episodes given the timing for us, but really interested in the range of content. So thank you again for the opportunity to contribute. As you said, my name is Kelly Tallon. I'm Manager of Regulatory Policy and Strategy at the Australian eSafety Commissioner. Just a little bit of background for those who may be unfamiliar with eSafety. We are Australia's independent regulator for online safety with the purpose of helping to safeguard people from online harms and to promote safer, more positive online experiences. And we do that by working across three main pillars. So the first is to try to prevent harm, and that's through education, awareness raising, and programs based on our research. Next, we offer protection through our investigations and removal schemes. Those are available for individuals who have encountered illegal and restricted content, such as child sexual exploitation material or terrorist and violent extremist content, as well as for those who've experienced cyberbullying, abuse, or the non-consensual sharing of intimate images. And then building on the insights we glean from those other areas of work, we also have the ability to push for more proactive systemic change. And that includes through new mandatory industry codes, which have just recently been registered, as well as a transparency and accountability mechanism, which is called the Basic Online Safety Expectations, and that allows us to require online services to answer questions about the steps they're taking to keep users safe. Within that last pillar of work, we also conduct horizon scanning and talk to experts and other important partners to identify both existing and emerging online safety risks and to inform our approach to these challenges. And that's the area of work that my team primarily concentrates on. And examples of some of our recent work in that space include a position statement that we put out at the end of last year on generative AI, as well as our 2023 roadmap and background paper on age verification and complementary measures to prevent and mitigate harms to children from online pornography, which I think will be the main focus of what we talk about today.
And that's brilliant. And you talk about that roadmap there in 2023. And obviously that was a great piece of work done by the eSafety Commissioners, but I had a bit of a mixed reception from politicians and from society in Australia. Tell us a bit about how you dealt with that, the reality of what really happened there.
Sure. So as you guys would be well familiar with, there are a very diverse range of very strongly held views and a wide section of stakeholders with an interest in age assurance and related issues. And so I think it was fair to say that we expected that the ultimate recommendations we put forward would not be based on consensus, but what we really aim to do through our extensive consultation is to make sure that we spoke to everybody who has skin in the game and got their views, and that we properly represented those views back to them and could show them that we took them into account and we weighed them up. And ultimately, we had as our sort of guiding star, the best interests of children and young people in Australia had to be the main concern, but we also were really careful to try to weigh against a whole range of other issues that were raised by that very broad stakeholder cohort. And so there was a large sort of human rights analysis, both looking at children and young people's rights, but also broader adults and adult performers and other people who might be impacted by regulation. I think it's fair to say that there wasn't a lot of, as I mentioned, it wasn't a consensus-based process, but there were some key themes that came through from every stakeholder group, and those included things like concern for privacy and security. And so when we put our recommendations forward through the roadmap, those were really, really front and center, and we wanted to make sure that anything we put forward could be understood and supported and trusted by the public and that full range of stakeholders. And so the tasking for the roadmap came from a parliamentary inquiry, and we were asked to look at a whole range of things, not just an age assurance mechanism itself, but also sort of supporting complementary measures, including education and awareness raising. The government's response to the roadmap was highly supportive of all those measures. And I think, again, while there wasn't a great deal of consensus across stakeholder groups, education and awareness raising tends to be something that most people can agree upon. So I would say that that was fairly uncontroversial. The way we suggested that Australia move forward on a mandatory age verification regime itself was to go forward with a trial in the first instance. And we looked to international examples and we wanted to build on the lessons learned from elsewhere. And so we looked at things like the EU consent trial. We looked at what's going on in sort of France and Spain and how they're looking at sort of double-blind systems to try to mitigate some of the risks around privacy and security in particular. And so our suggestion was to have a sort of whole of government approach to a trial that tried to build on some of the lessons learned. And the government response to that was not a no. I think in some quarters it was perceived as a no. The government response was, okay, we will take that under advisement, but in the meantime, the eSafety Commissioner has an existing set of powers and functions under the Online Safety Act, and that includes developing, under a co-regulatory regime, a set of industry codes and standards to apply to basically two sets of issues. One is around really high-end harmful content like child sexual exploitation material and terrorist and violent extremism. And then the other suite of issues are around children's access to content that is harmful and inappropriate for them, including pornography. And so that first tranche of work around the high-end content was already underway in terms of co-developing industry codes with the online industry. And so the government sort of said, at the conclusion of that phase one, we expect that second phase of codes work to go underway. And we anticipate that that's where the emphasis should lie while a pilot sort of is under consideration. So eSafety has, we're still in the process of finalizing that first phase of codes and standards. They do apply to a really wide cross-section of the online industry, which is a real benefit that we can take a whole sort of digital ecosystem approach to this issue. We're not just looking at one subsection of the online industry like apps and sites where content is found. We're also looking at things like infrastructure level services like ISPs and hosting, as well as the kind of choke points in the ecosystem like app stores and search engines. We were able to register 6 of the 8 codes for that first phase. The commissioner chose not to register 2 of the industry codes that were put forward by industry associations after she deemed that they didn't meet appropriate community safeguards. And so what happens after that is then eSafety gets an opportunity to develop the mandatory rules through a set of standards. And so we are at the final stages of that process for that first phase. Before the second phase of codes development can go underway, we have to conclude that first phase. But initially, the government response was, let's focus on that codes process in the first instance. As you sort of alluded to, there was a bit of a public reaction on that front. We did hear from, not only people across government, but sections of sort of children's advocacy and others that they were concerned and wanted to see a pilot move forward. And I do think that the messaging from government again, it was never a no that the pilot wasn't going to happen, but I think we have seen an evolution of the messaging, and the messaging at the moment is that the policy department with responsibility is currently scoping a potential age verification pilot at the moment.
Yeah, so you've got an election coming up this year. We've all got elections coming up. We've got elections here in the UK, elections everywhere. Do you think this is, I mean, I'm not expecting you to comment politically or anything like that, but do you think this is something which politicians will be focused on during that election period?
I do. I think that's likely. I think the opposition has put forward some positioning about what they would do in this space if they were to win the election. And so I think this will be an issue. But online safety and these issues, they tend to get bipartisan support. And so that's always something that we've had the benefit of at eSafety, is that from all areas of government, we have seen wide support for the work that we do and the approach that we take, generally speaking.
So one of the responses that you had, and one of the things was this is just the adult industry using delay tactics and using things to slow down the pace of regulation, and we've seen that not just in Australia but all over the world. In the US states, they are bringing in similar sorts of controls and restrictions. They go for big banner advertising on their site to say, you know, this is you're being blocked from access to these materials by new laws and regulations. Do you see that there is that kind of lobbying for delay going on, or is it just genuinely the politicians are not really listening to that, but really thinking very carefully about the privacy, security, and sort of consumer and user experience with age verification and age assurance?
I don't think many across government would be particularly swayed by adult industry lobbying on that front. So I don't think that is really at play here. I mean, one of the things that we looked at in the roadmap and the accompanying background report was the fact that in other jurisdictions that have put forward mandatory age verification elements, they've all struggled with compliance and enforcement. And one of the issues that was raised in our consultations with the adult industry was the perception that, you know, if they were to comply, there would be a whole suite of other services that didn't comply. And then the argument goes, children and young people essentially get funneled via search to those services that don't have the friction and don't have the compliance with age assurance mechanisms in place. As I mentioned before, one of the benefits of our industry codes and standards regime under the Online Safety Act is that it does try to take that ecosystem approach. And so the idea is that everybody across the entire digital ecosystem is supposed to play their part. And so, you know, adult websites themselves have a huge role to play here, but they are not the only ones. And so we want to make sure that search engines, for example, are not funneling non-compliant services to the top of search return results and undermining the efforts of compliant services to actually try to prevent children from accessing them. We want to make sure that ISPs are offering parents appropriate, accessible tools that they can help manage their children's access to certain areas of the internet. So I guess we see that everybody has a role to play. We have seen in consultation some stakeholders who tend to point fingers at other areas and sort of say, oh, this isn't our job, this is that person's job. And then you'll talk to them and they'll say it's somebody else's job. I think what we want is for everybody to come forward and play their appropriate role.
Yeah, I think we've certainly seen messages along the lines of it should be on the device, or it's down to parents to decide, or it's not down to us as a provider of services, or all we're doing is providing a search facility, or all we do is provide you connection to the internet, or all we do is provide you with a virtual private network. All these people in the mix seem to just say that's our bit of the job and it's somebody else's job to protect children online. What's the eSafety Commissioner's view about that?
I mean, our view is that everybody has a role to play and everybody needs to come forward. And so that was also the stance for that first phase of codes. And so, as I mentioned, 6 of the 8 sections of industry managed to get their industry produced codes registered, which means that they met appropriate community safeguards under the legislative test. And so, there was a process of working with them, putting out a position paper to establish our expectations, working with the industry associations and members. And I think we've learned a lot from that process that we can then take into this second phase, which is more about children's access to materials such as pornography. 2 of the codes, like I said, did not meet the threshold under the legislation. And so we have moved to standards in that space. And so that was for 2 of the sort of broader and arguably more difficult sections of the online industry, one being what's termed relevant electronic services under the Act, and that covers things like gaming, messaging, dating. And then there's sort of a catch-all category called designated internet services, which is other apps and websites which are not relevant electronic services or social media services. And those were the areas where there was the greatest difficulty. And so I think looking forward to this second phase of codes and potentially standards, we'll be looking to try to apply the lessons that we've learned through that first phase and working really closely with industry associations. But we were really pleased that so many of the associations and members really came to the table and accepted our feedback throughout the course of that process, and so that we could get the majority of codes across the line.
So when we turn to the issue of how you actually go about enforcing any of this, when it comes in with rules and community standards, obviously there's a responsibility on the people whose product it is to self enforce it and comply with their own rules. But when it comes to actually tactics, one of the problems you have with the internet is, of course, it's so fluid. You move things around all over the place. Yes. And so a lot of organizations around the world are exploring kind of secondary enforcement measures, such as, for instance, squeezing the money or squeezing the traffic or squeezing the ability to access the internet. Have you explored anything around like what the role of payment card services or the role of internet service providers when it comes to facilitating the access to adult content?
Yes, we have looked at that in our background paper to the roadmap. And so we were trying to look at the various, the members of the digital ecosystem themselves, but then some people who sort of hold levers in this ecosystem. And so we had looked at examples of where payment processors had been brought in, where there were concerns that they were facilitating non-compliance. We also looked at the role of advertisers in this space. And the role of some others, including various members of the sort of infrastructure level services, domain registrars and administrators, for example. And we tried to look to international experience where there have been issues with compliance and enforcement, as I mentioned before. I believe it was either France or potentially Germany, where there was a very lengthy court process, and finally there were ISP blocking orders issued, and I believe that one of the blocked sites then just subsequently changed domain. And so we are really keen to learn the lessons there. Our Online Safety Act is being reviewed independently this year. There's going to be a consultation process that opens up in the next couple of months. And as part of the roadmap and background report, we put forward some of those lessons learned and some suggestions about how the Online Safety Act could be shored up so that we can hopefully avoid some of those pitfalls that others have experienced.
And just in Australia particularly, what's the local challenges you face? I appreciate you're in a country that's got a federal system with the federal government, and then you've got the states and territories. How have the states and territories regulation of some of their local issues affected what you've been doing at a federal level?
There hasn't been too much for us in terms of the states and territories. I mean, we were very conscious of wanting to make sure that we tried to tie together all of the efforts that are underway in Australia on the age assurance front. And so obviously our roadmap, our tasking was to focus on the issue of children's access to online pornography. But we know that some of the states are looking to apply age assurance in the realm of online alcohol sales. We also know that there is a Privacy Act review was recently undertaken in Australia. And one of the proposals that was put forward as part of that was the introduction of a children's privacy code that would look to build on the example of the UK ICO's age appropriate design code, and trying to look to make sure that there were age assurance measures in place so that users were verified as being of the age where they could consent to their data collection. We also know from our work in the child sexual exploitation and abuse space that age assurance can be extremely important to be separating out children and young people and adults, and making sure that appropriate privacy and safety settings are employed on children's accounts to try to mitigate some of those risks. So what we tried to do is both stick to our tasking, which was to look at the issue of children's access to online pornography, but also situate the report amongst that broader set of concerns and some of the other things that are happening. And so I mentioned the Privacy Act is a really huge one to make sure that those privacy settings are in place if and when any age assurance sort of mechanisms are mandated. The other really important piece of work that is ongoing in Australia is around digital identity. And the digital identity bill has actually just passed through the Senate this week. And so that piece of work is also sort of intricately connected to sort of any age assurance things that are put forward. And so we wanted to make sure that we were consulting, like I said, across government, and that also the pilot that we put forward contemplated a role for everybody else who's working in this space so that we can have a joined up approach.
And my final question to you, Kelly, is, we're here in Manchester. I've got a week's worth of activity exploring the development of international standards, in particular ISO IEC 27566, Age Assurance Systems Framework. What role do you see those international standards, when they're finalised and completed, feeding into your codes and your practices, and how you will approach ensuring a consistent approach about how you deal with age assurance?
Yeah, I think that work is extremely important, and we have so much gratitude to you guys for putting in the effort there. One of the major themes that came through our consultation was the need for international sort of standardization and interoperability and collaboration. And so the standards piece is one really foundational element of that. And we did look at some of the standards that are currently out there and some of the work that's around developing this particular standard in our background report. The other element is, of course, broader international collaboration, and we have a global online safety regulators network that's been formed, which Ofcom is now chairing, and it's got a digital technology working group, which is looking at age assurance and other technologies. It's looking at sort of approaches to regulatory coherence. I know, we'll never get perfect harmony across all of the legislation across the globe, but we can certainly be working together to make sure that we're all essentially singing from the same song sheet, and trying to make compliance as easy as possible for members of the online industry, and to work together to do so. And eSafety also sits as an observer on some of the other international groups that are looking at age assurance. And it's really important to learn from those conversations, and to be trying to build up and learn the lessons from others. So again, I'm really disappointed I couldn't be at the summit, because I think a lot of really important conversations are going to be had, but we're really, really appreciative of.
That's good. And just a final thought from you. If you're an 8-year-old in Australia today, what would you like that 18-year-old in 10 years' time to feel about their growing up and childhood?
Oh, that's a difficult question. Well, I guess from the perspective of the work that we're doing, I'd like them to feel supported and equipped to access the online world in a way that's as safe as possible. I'd like them to feel like their parents and their guardians and the adult supporters in their life are similarly equipped to have those really important conversations with them, and to set their expectations and some rules for their internet use. I'd like them to feel that their best interests and rights and their evolving capacity is at the heart of all the decision making. And for them to really be able to access all of the wonderful benefits that the internet has to offer without the risks really undermining those benefits.
Fantastic. Kelly Tallon, eSafety Commissioner, Commissioner's Office. Thank you very much for your time. We really look forward to seeing you next time we're out in Australia, and hopefully you'll get to watch the proceedings as we go on for the rest of the day here in Manchester. Thank you very much.
We will absolutely tune in. Thank you so much.